There was a time when John Cusack looked like the kind of actor Hollywood could easily understand. The sensitive guy, the romantic outsider, the young man standing outside a window with a boombox, believing that one honest gesture could fix everything. For millions of people, that became the image they never forgot. But that image was never the full truth, because behind that soft-spoken face was a man who quietly spent decades fighting against the exact machine that made him famous. He did not want to be packaged. He did not want to be controlled. He did not want to become the safe Hollywood version of himself. And now, at 60, after leaving Los Angeles, moving back to Chicago, speaking openly against the industry, and choosing a life far away from the spotlight that once chased him, John Cusack's story feels less like a career and more like a quiet rebellion. But before we go deeper, if you enjoy emotional Hollywood stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more stories with respect, truth, and depth. Because the most shocking thing about John Cusack is not that he became famous. It is that once Hollywood finally knew how to sell him, he refused to let them. John Paul Cusack was born on June 28, 1966, in Evanston, Illinois, a place that would stay inside him long after Hollywood tried to pull him away. He was not raised in a family that treated creativity like a hobby. He was raised in a house where art, politics, films, arguments, ideas, and meaning were part of everyday life. His father, Dick Cusack, had spent years in advertising and had even won major awards for his work. But then he made a decision that would shape his children forever. He walked away from that world because he believed there were bigger things to talk about than selling products. He wanted to make work that mattered. That lesson did not just inspire John, it became part of him. In the Cusack household, success was not simply about money or fame. It was about purpose. It was about asking why something mattered before giving your life to it. And that is why all 5 Cusack children eventually entered acting in some way. They were not pushed into it like a Hollywood family chasing attention. They grew up around storytelling. And storytelling became the language of the house. By the time John was still a kid, he was already doing commercials, voice work, and small acting jobs. By 17, he had appeared in the film Class with Rob Lowe and Andrew McCarthy. He briefly attended New York University, but he did not stay long. For him, acting was not something he wanted to study from a distance. It was something he wanted to do. But the first major twist in his life was already forming, because John Cusack was entering Hollywood with a mindset Hollywood does not always reward. He did not just want to be an actor. He wanted to understand the whole machine. The writing, the tone, the character, the meaning, the control. He wanted to own the work before the work owned him. And that one belief would eventually make him powerful. It would also make him dangerous to an industry that prefers actors who obey. In the 1980s, John Cusack started building the image audiences would fall in love with. He was not the most polished leading man. He was not presented like a perfect movie star. That was exactly why people trusted him. In films like Better Off Dead, One Crazy Summer, The Sure Thing, and his smaller but memorable appearance in Stand By Me, Cusack had something different. He felt real. Awkward, clever, emotional, unsure of himself, but always honest. He did not look like a fantasy version of a young man. He looked like someone you might actually know. Then came 1989. Say Anything changed everything. Lloyd Dobler was not just another romantic character. He became a symbol. The image of him holding a boombox above his head outside Diane's window became one of the most remembered moments in movie history. To some people, it was romantic. To others, it was painful. But the reason it lasted was because it felt vulnerable. Lloyd was not smooth. He was not powerful. He was not the guy with the perfect plan. He was a young man standing in the dark with no real strategy except sincerity. And that made him unforgettable. But here is where the story becomes interesting. Hollywood saw Lloyd Dobler and thought they had found John Cusack's lane forever. The sweet outsider, the romantic underdog, the sensitive guy who could carry a love story without seeming fake. That could have made him rich and comfortable for years. But John Cusack did not want comfort. He wanted something darker. He wanted risk. And when an actor rejects the role Hollywood wants him to repeat, the industry does not always forgive him. After Say Anything, Cusack could have stayed in that romantic lane. Instead, he moved toward films that were more complicated, more uncomfortable, and much harder to explain in a poster. In The Grifters, he played a small-time conman surrounded by manipulation, danger, and emotional poison. It was far removed from Lloyd Dobler. The charm was still there, but now it had shadows around it. He was working with actors like Angelica Houston and Annette Bening, and he later admitted the experience challenged him deeply. That was the kind of fear he respected, because fear meant he was growing. Then came 8 Men Out, where Cusack played Buck Weaver in the story of the 1919 Black Sox scandal. This role mattered to him in a different way, because Chicago was not just a place in his biography. It was part of his identity. The history, the ballparks, the streets, the loyalty, the disappointment. He understood that world. And slowly, John Cusack was becoming something Hollywood could not easily label. He could be funny. He could be romantic. He could be cold. He could be emotional. He could be deeply American and completely anti-Hollywood at the same time. But the real proof came in 1997. Grosse Pointe Blank was the moment John Cusack stopped being only an actor and revealed himself as a true creative force. He co-wrote it. He produced it. He helped shape the tone, the cast, and the strange balance that made it work. The idea alone sounded almost impossible. A professional hitman returns to his hometown for his 10-year high school reunion and faces the life he left behind. It was violent, funny, strange, sad, and weirdly honest about what happens when adulthood turns you into someone you barely recognize. Cusack played Martin Blank like a man split in half. On the surface, calm and sarcastic. Underneath, completely lost. And that is why the film worked, because beneath the comedy was a darker question. What if you grow up, get everything you thought you were supposed to get, and still feel like you disappeared? That question was not just Martin Blank's question. It was becoming John Cusack's question too. And then, just when people thought they understood him again, he made one of the strangest choices of his entire career, being John Malkovich. This was not a safe project. This was not a normal Hollywood film. It was surreal, bizarre, funny, disturbing, and almost impossible to describe in one clean sentence. A puppeteer discovers a portal into the mind of actor John Malkovich, and suddenly identity, fame, desire, control, and obsession all become part of one strange nightmare. Most actors might have avoided something that weird. Cusack chased it. And that is what separated him from many stars of his era. He was not only looking for roles that made him look good. He was looking for roles that made him uncomfortable, roles that made audiences ask, "What am I even watching?" The film became a major critical success and proved that Cusack had taste, nerve, and a rare willingness to step into stories other people were afraid to touch. But then came another twist. Hollywood changed. And it did not change in John Cusack's favor. For much of the 1990s, actors like Cusack had space to exist. Mid-budget adult movies were still alive. Studios still made strange comedies, character dramas, offbeat romances, and films driven by writing rather than only spectacle. But slowly, that world began to disappear. Studios started chasing franchises, sequels, superheroes, massive global box office numbers, and easily marketable brands. The kind of smart, strange, personal films that helped define Cusack's career were becoming harder to make. The industry wanted safer products, bigger budgets, simpler hooks, characters that could be sold internationally in seconds. And John Cusack was not built for that. He was too specific, too opinionated, too restless, too hard to package. He still appeared in big movies. He was in Con Air. He later starred in 2012. These films kept him visible, and some were commercially successful. But they did not fully use what made him interesting. They used the face, the presence, the familiarity, but not always the soul. That is the quiet tragedy of many Hollywood careers. The actor does not disappear all at once. First, the industry stops asking the deepest version of him to show up. But Cusack still found moments where the real artist came through. One of the strongest examples came with Love and Mercy, where he played the older Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. This was not a flashy performance. It was quiet, wounded, and deeply human. The film explored creativity, mental suffering, control, survival, and the difficult return of a man who had been through darkness. Cusack approached Brian Wilson with care. He spent time trying to understand him, not as a legend, but as a person. He described him as deeply vulnerable, but also incredibly tough. That combination softness and strength was exactly the kind of contradiction Cusack had always understood. The performance received strong praise, but the major awards did not come. And that part matters, because by that point, John Cusack had already learned something brutal about Hollywood. You can do honest work. You can give one of your best performances. You can help tell a story that matters. And still, the industry may simply move on. But he did not stop. He just stopped waiting for approval. In 2003, John Cusack lost his father, Dick Cusack, to pancreatic cancer. His father was 77. John was 36, already famous, already successful, and already watching the Hollywood system move away from the kind of work his father had taught him to value. The loss was private, but its impact can be felt in the direction his life took afterward. He became more outspoken, more direct, less interested in being palatable, less interested in playing the game. The man who had grown up hearing that art should mean something now seemed increasingly unwilling to pretend that fame was enough. And when John Cusack spoke, he did not speak like someone trying to protect a brand. He spoke like someone who had stopped calculating the consequences. Over the years, Cusack became politically active in ways that likely made Hollywood less comfortable with him. He criticized war. He supported press freedom. He co-founded the Freedom of the Press Foundation in 2012. He wrote publicly. He protested. He traveled with major activists and thinkers. He did not separate art from conscience the way the industry often prefers its actors to do. Then, during the George Floyd protests in Chicago in 2020, he filmed events on the street and said police attacked him while he was recording. He posted about it publicly. He did not soften the moment for public relations. He did not apologize for being there. For some fans, this made him more admirable. For others, it made him more controversial. But for John Cusack, that seemed to be the point. He was never trying to please everyone. He was trying to stay honest to the version of himself that had been shaped long before Hollywood knew his name. And then came one of the most revealing parts of his story. He left Malibu. He moved back to Chicago. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Did John Cusack's movies ever feel like a mirror for something in your own life? And more importantly, is there something you still love, even though the world once told you it was not practical enough to keep loving? Tell us in the comments, and we will see you in the next video.